Hello and welcome to Return to Regalia, an Underland Chronicles reread podcast. I'm Una.
And I'm Carrie.
Today we'll be covering chapter 22 of The Curse of the Warmbloods, in which the questers harvest the Starshade. What did you think of this chapter?
It's exciting. I mean, from the very beginning, like Rip Red's like, is this it? Is this the Starshade? So it is. It's an exciting chapter.
Yes, it is.
Lots of things going on.
Absolutely. Carrie, remind me how you got into the series.
Well, actually, Kathy Kemnitz was the first person that introduced me to it. And for some reason, I didn't remember, and I thought it was you. But really, it was you. Sorry, Kathy.
Yeah, we gotta give Kathy credit, because I'm pretty sure she was the one who told my mom about the books, too.
Oh, geez.
So even though I thought that I had first heard the book when my, fifth grade teacher read it to us in class, that might have come first, but then definitely my mom got the books from the library because Kathy told her about them.
All right. We gotta give some credit where credit is due.
We owe it all to Kathy.
Everything. Our lives, even.
All right. Where we left off, Hamnet had just returned with a handful of Starshade. Chapter 22 begins with Gregor excitedly confirming that the plant looks just like the drawing in Naviv's book. He asks if they can go get it now, but Hamnet tells him they have to rest first. Gregor falls asleep holding the Starshade leaf in his hand. The narration says, "He held the Starshade leaf in his palm and let the light dance over it. In his hand was life for his mom, for Ares, for all of the Underland." And I just wanted to point out this quote because he's holding the Starshade and then the light is dancing over it. So he has the light in his hand and he's saying in his hand was life. So we're equating light with life again.
Yes.
Which these books do a lot. So I thought that was an interesting bit of thematic relevance.
Definitely. And he's so happy there, and they've gone on this huge journey, and he's so happy when he's, falling asleep, and
yes,
doesn't last long.
Yeah, no. But I love the image of him holding it as he's falling asleep, a stuffed animal. Yeah, super cute. Later, Hamnet wakes him up and everyone eats. Hamnet warns everyone that the path they'll be taking is dangerous and they'll have to move quickly. Rip Red has come up with an order for them to walk in that will improve their chances of survival. Frill goes in front with the two bats and Hazard on her back. Rip Red is to the right of her with Gregor and Boots on his back. Luxa is supposed to ride on Lapblood's back, but she clearly doesn't want to, saying she can run on her own two legs. Hamnet tells her to just trust him, and Luxa reluctantly gets on Lapblood. Boots is confused about them riding on Rip Red, and Gregor says she can go back on Temp soon. Boots pokes Rip Red's head and says, "R is for rat," and Rip Red replies, "Yes, and B is for bite. Be careful the rat doesn't bite your fingers," and snaps his teeth. This scares Boots back into Gregor's arms, and when Gregor asks Rip Red if that was necessary, Rip Red says, "Absolutely. You want her going up and trying to pet rats? Not in this day and age." Which I think is a funny way of saying it. Not in this day and age.
Right. Not in this climate.
Yeah, not in this economy. Gregor knows that Rip Red has a point, but then he thinks, if the humans and rats taught their babies from birth to fear each other, how was anything ever going to get better? Which is a really interesting thing for him to be thinking about, because in the next book as well, we're going to get a lot into kind of the way that the humans and the rats teach each other from very young ages to distrust each other, and how that's just doing more and more harm. And so I like that Gregor is thinking about this right now, but he's also acknowledging that, Rip Red's right. Boots should not be going up and trying to pet rats. And it would be safer if she didn't, but at the same time, what harm is that doing for both species in the long run?
Exactly. They're still raddest. I mean, it reminds me of, obviously, it reminds me of almost racism, because, if white folk and black folk teach each other to fear from a young age, then of course you're going to have these old ideas. And it's similar to this. And I just kind of, I don't know, it teaches a way bigger sort of picture, but it's a great message for children,
Yeah, it's definitely illustrating how these this hatred is perpetuated, and how even under the guise of like, we're teaching them to be safe,
right,
like that is perpetuating the idea of like this group of people or the rats is dangerous, and you know, what harm is that doing? So it's really interesting, and I love it as a theme for these books.
Totally. I do too.
Yeah, so Gregor decides he doesn't have time to unpack all of that right now, so he keeps his mouth shut. Hamnet tells them that after a while he'll signal for them to run, and they can't stop until they reach the field of Starshade. Gregor thinks the vines along the narrow path are beautiful, and he hears a tinkling sound like bells, which gives the impression of a magical fairyland. The smell of the flowers starts to make him dizzy with happiness, and that's when Hamnet shouts at them to run. Rip Red runs so fast, Gregor has to hold on to his ears to keep from falling off, but the scent of the flowers is making his mind cloudy. When Rip Red tells him to hang on, Gregor starts laughing for no apparent reason. The vines shoot out at him, and he wants to reach for them, but then Frill rears up on her hind legs to sprint, and the sight of it makes Gregor laugh even more. There's a funny paragraph that follows Gregor's muddled thoughts as he considers how strange it is that the Starshade is called Starshade, even though there are no stars in the Underland. Gregor yells, "Maybe they should call it Never Seen a Starshade," and falls off Rip Red's back, which is a very iconic Gregor moment to me.
Yeah, I was thinking, like, what, you know, there's some plant magic for you, and what plant magic would compare in our world?
Yeah.
You know, like, it reminds me of, like, Wizard of Oz and, like, the poppies, where they all, like, start getting goofy and falling asleep, and...
I hadn't made that connection, but yeah. It's really great, like, in the middle of this really creepy part of the jungle. Like, I was talking with John on the last episode about how creepy the Vineyard of Eyes is. Like, the plants are, like, following you with their eyes, and it's just described as, like, super ominous. And then in the middle of that is this really funny scene with Gregor and everyone kind of getting high off the plants and just, like, kind of, like, losing it a bit. And it's really funny, and I like that we get that break, like, this comedic relief in the middle of this really, like, scary place.
Yeah, I like it. I like the fact that the plants are a villain on their own, and that, I don't know if it was Rip Red or Hamnet that said that they're gonna, you know, pull you into the woods and dismember you. Yeah. I just love that idea that the plants can be villains too on this world.
Yeah, it's so creepy, just the idea that, like, not just the plants, but, like, the whole environment of the Vineyard of Eyes is working together to, like, trap you.
Yes.
It's so creepy.
Yes, with a beautiful path and
yes,
inviting.
So Gregor falls off of Rip Red's back, and the plants immediately start wrapping around his arms, trying to pull him into them. Something else pulls Gregor in the opposite direction, and the vines snap. Gregor says farewell to his plant friends, and soon he's lying in a field, still giggling about never seen a starshade. Suddenly, he comes back to his senses and looks around. The group is scattered around the field of Starshade, and almost everyone is still out of it, laughing and hiccuping and flying in circles.
I wish that we could have seen some of that from Rip Red. You know what I mean? Like, I think that would be hilarious, but he isn't affected. Like, if his nose is a million times better than ours, like, you know, how come he wasn't affected?
You're so right.
And, like, I wonder, too, sometimes, like, could they have tried to put something over their nose or face to block it, or would it have just gotten them anyway?
That's a really good point. Yeah, they didn't think about that. Maybe they just figured they didn't have anything to do that with, but...
Yeah.
Man, I don't know.
Some duct tape.
Yeah, tear up someone's shirt and make a little, like, makeshift mask.
Yeah.
That is interesting.
But, yeah, I would have loved seeing a little bit of goofiness from Rip Red around that.
Yes, I can't imagine him being goofy like that, though.
Or, like, not having control at every moment. Right. You know what I mean? Because he's so, like, you know, like, I've made a strategic plan for us so that less of us die.
Yeah, exactly. He's so in command, and it would be really, really funny to see him lose that.
Yes.
And I think that it makes sense that Suzanne Collins didn't let us see that, because then that would, like, break the facade of Rip Red that she's building. But I would also love to have seen like, from Ripred's perspective, like, having to deal with Gregor and Luxa and everyone who's, like, high off the plants, like, having to, like, herd them, like, he's the designated driver and he's trying to get all of his drunk friends into the cab or whatever.
Yes. It feels like, I don't know, he kind of thinks they're all ridiculous anyway, and that would probably be super annoying for him.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Gregor sees that Ripred and Hamnet are taking deep breaths of the star shade, and he copies them. He asks what happened, and Hamnet basically tells him that the flowers along the path get you high so they can drag you away and eat you. Hamnet was afraid that if he warned the kids about the plants, they'd try to fight them. Luxa says she could have fought them, then descends into more giggles when Nike hiccups again. Ripred tells them they had to drag Luxa and Gregor away from the plants, but neither Luxa nor Gregor seem to remember that. Hamnet says the plants affect the smallest more quickly, which he knows only because he and Frill had Hazard with them when they went scouting the night before. Before they start harvesting the starshade, Hamnet has everyone eat some of it, citing the line in the prophecy that says, "In the cradle lies the cure." He thinks the plague must be present in the vineyard, and because everyone has open wounds, they might be in danger of catching it. Gregor eats the leaves, which taste like lemon and mint, but Boots doesn't want to until Hamnet makes a game out of who can eat a leaf the fastest. Hazard and Temp play with her and let her win until they've all eaten plenty, which I think is very cute. And it's also just a good, like, parenting tip of, like, if your kid doesn't want to do something, like, make a game out of it. I've done that when I'm babysitting. Yeah.
Definitely works most of the time. I wish it worked on my daughter, but that's another story.
They start harvesting the plants, and Gregor provides duct tape from his pack to secure bundles of them. My question was, what were they supposed to do if Gregor hadn't brought the duct tape? Like, the Regalians didn't send them with rope or whatever to, like, harvest?
A bag?
Yeah, literally.
Something.
They just figured, like, oh, you'll figure it out. Like, Hamnet is impressed by the duct tape, and Gregor gives Marith credit for packing it for him. Then he feels awkward about mentioning Marith, because now he knows the story about Marith saving Hamnet's life at the Garden of the Hesperides, and he says sorry. Hamnet says, "Why? Marith is one of the few people I do not mind being in debt to." Carrie, are you aware of my Hamnet-Marith agenda?
No.
I believe very strongly that Hamnet and Marith were boyfriends.
Huh. Interesting.
I think there's a lot of untapped potential there. And I think that it would make a beautiful, romantic, tragic love story.
It would.
Yeah. And many fans agree with me.
Yeah. What are some of your, what's your evidence as a teacher? What's your evidence from the text?
My favorite part in this book is when Gregor brings out the water bottle that Marith packed for him, and Hamnet is like, "Oh, that was a good idea bringing the water." And Gregor said, "Marith packed it for me." And then Hamnet is like, "Oh, has Marith managed to stay alive all these years?" And he just is, like, looking at the water bottle, like, kind of out of it. And I just think that, like, that's not a whole lot of evidence, but it's enough for me.
It's enough for the gays.
Exactly. We are very adept at picking up on the subtlest of clues.
Exactly.
And that is a clue for me. Yeah.
Total, because, like, so many gay folk in other worlds and other lands and periods of time and cultures have always had to, like, play it cool and be on the down low. So that makes all the sense to me.
Yes. I'm glad that I'm converting you to my Hammerith agenda.
I'm converted.
Excellent. I'm on my way to world domination. Everyone gets to work gathering starshade. Most of the team pick the plants, while the humans tape the bundles together. Boots sings her ABCs and dances the little prophecy dance that she came up with. Aurora and Nike make sure she stays in the field, but when she starts to get interested in the jungle again, Gregor gives her the toys Dulcet packed and the hand mirror Nerissa gave him. Gregor and Luxa work together and discuss what they learned about Hamnet the night before. Luxa thinks Hamnet should have come back to Regalia, but Gregor understands why Hamnet didn't, because they would have made him fight again. Luxa says, "There is no great joy in killing for any of us. We do it to survive." Gregor asks if she thinks Hamnet is a coward, and she says not exactly, but it's easier for him to live isolated in the jungle than, quote, "face his true life." Gregor doesn't agree, though, because living in the jungle is difficult, and Hamnet gave up everything he knew because he felt so strongly about the atrocities he committed. Gregor tells Luxa that Hamnet made a brave choice, and in his mind it was the only choice he could make. Luxa says, perhaps, but asks Gregor if he would have abandoned his family. Gregor says, that's different. My family doesn't even allow hitting. Your family's always in a war. Luxa just responds, so is yours now, and rips off a piece of duct tape with her teeth, which I think is nicely dramatic. This is actually kind of a discussion that the fandom has been having recently, because a lot of people think Hamnet is right to have left Regalia, and that was the only choice that he could make. Like, they agree with Gregor, and a lot of them point to how abusive Solovet was, and how if Hamnet had stayed, there would be, like, no escaping Solovet's command. But then on the other hand, some other fans believe that Hamnet is kind of just avoiding his problems by running away to the jungle, and he could have done more to help the Underland by staying in Regalia and not just, like, isolating himself. And I think that the point is that Luxa and Gregor are both a little bit right, and there are definitely, you know, points to be made on both sides for that, but it's a really interesting discussion to have, and Hamnet is a fascinating character.
Yeah, I love it too, because, I mean, you don't exactly know what happened, and, like, he probably had, I mean, I know this is a made-up book, but he probably had trauma from all of that, and he was just trying to work things out. I mean, Solovet is the runner of the war machine, and that's what she's good at, and that's what she's done, and I can really see Gregor's point of view that he probably wouldn't have gotten out of it, and then would have been shamed as a man that he's supposed to grow up and fight. And I don't know, the part that comes next, I just love so much.
Yeah. I tend to lean a little bit more on Gregor's side as well, I think. But yeah, Hamnet comes back to help them with the plant bundles, and he and Luxa don't speak to each other. Gregor tries to strike up a conversation by mentioning how alike they look, and how Luxa must look just like her mom, who was Hamnet's twin. Hamnet starts to say something about Luxa as a baby, and Gregor realizes that he would have still been in Regalia when Luxa was around 2 years old. Hamnet says he and Luxa were good friends back then, and he took her on her first flyer ride outside the city. Luxa recalls how they went to a beach with crystals, and Hamnet is surprised she remembers. Luxa says she still has a blue crystal from that trip, and Hamnet remembers how it's shaped like a fish. He says, of everything I left behind in Regalia, Luxa, you were my greatest regret, you and your mother. Luxa says he could have visited them, but Hamnet just says, I could never have left twice. You know how Solovet works. She would have had me leading an army again in no time. Luxa says Solovet couldn't have forced him, but Gregor thinks she would have found something to make him fight again, like guilt or shame or duty.
Just like Gregor, you know, like he thought he was out.
Exactly.
He wanted to be back home, but she always came up with the way for him to, like, be forced to come back, forced into the prophecy and all the quests and everything. I mean, he doesn't feel like he has a choice because of his family, and I'm sure she could have done the same thing.
Yeah, this is exactly what we're talking about. Like, Solovet has a tremendous amount of influence on Regalian society, on the whole Underland, and definitely on Hamnet, her son, and all of the expectations that Ripred was talking about last chapter. He was saying, like, everyone expected Hamnet to be just like Solovet and, like, take over the army. And I think that all of those expectations would have been fuel for Solovet to use against Hamnet to try and, like, keep him trapped.
I mean, definitely. And like Luxa before was saying, like, you're running away from your true life. Well, that was Solovet's idea of his true life.
Exactly.
And not his idea of his true life. And that's his choice. If he doesn't want to be a killer, it seems to make sense.
Right.
You know?
Exactly. I really like what he says also about I could never have left twice. Like, if he were to have come back, he wouldn't have had the strength to leave again.
Right.
I think that's really tragic. And yeah, it's just really sad that Hamnet knows that to keep himself from becoming a monster, he has to stay away.
Yeah.
And he believes that he just needed to give up everything. And he really regrets leaving behind his sister and Luxa. But, like, it's just, he's fascinating. Hamnet is the most interesting character.
He is.
Hamnet reveals that he still dreams about the drowning victims in the Garden of the Hesperides every night. He says, "And what did it solve? The battle at the garden? Nothing. It solved nothing at all. When it was over, the humans and Nars hated one another more than ever. The Underland only became a more dangerous place." After a long pause, Gregor asks if Hamnet ever fights these days, like if something attacks him or Hazard. Hamnet says he's learned from Frill to only fight as a last resort. He says, "It turns out there are many alternatives to violence if you make an effort to develop them."
I love that part.
I love that line too.
I mean, it's really awesome. Like from a special ed teacher's point of view, you know, your list of strategies.
Yeah.
And it's exactly true because in life as well as in the book, there are many ways not to fight. And if you actually think about them, and it's so cool that he learned it from Frill, that there really are so many different ways. And if only Hamnet could teach all of our world leaders the same thing.
I know, right? If only every world leader could have a Frill.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I love this whole, like, there are many alternatives to violence if you make an effort to develop them. Like, it takes work. He's saying, like, you have to make an effort and you have to, you know, even if violence is, like, the easiest route sometimes, like, there are better ways and you have to put in that work. And I think that that's a big theme throughout this whole series is, like, it's work to make the world a better place, but you have to do it.
Yes. And to just like think, and the way he goes through it, it's like step 1, step 2. I mean, it's like a whole plan that's thought out ahead of time and has been practiced. And
exactly,
you know, if you take the time to even just think about it, there's so many other ways.
Right. And it makes so much sense once you point out that you don't have to go in drawing your swords all the time.
Yes.
Yeah. So he says, if Frill is ever in danger, her first instinct is to hide with her camouflage. And if that doesn't work, she opens her ruff to make herself look bigger and scare off the threat. Gregor jokes that the Frill making herself look bigger didn't work on Boots when the two first met. Hamnet explains that if Boots had been a real threat, Frill would have lashed her tail on the ground. After that, if something still tries to attack, she runs or climbs into the vines to get away. Luxa asks what happens when Frill is cornered with no other options, and Hamnet says, then she fights. But it is always her last choice, as opposed to the Regalians, who seem to conclude it is their only option almost immediately. Living out here, I have found that many creatures would prefer not to fight, but if your first instinct is to reach for your sword, you will never discover that. And I think this right here is perhaps like the most concentrated amount of message in the whole series. Like this thing that Hamnet says is straight up like what the book is telling you.
Yes.
There's a scene in the next book, too, where Luxa and Gregor think back to when Hamnet says this. It's the scene where they encounter some scorpions, and they come in and they assume that the scorpions are going to hurt them, so they all start fighting, and then they manage to defuse the situation, and they find out that the scorpions don't want to fight them, and they can just pass through peacefully, and then they remember what Hamnet said, and I think something then kind of clicks for Luxa, like, oh, he was right, like, we can resolve things without drawing our swords.
Yeah, and like, if somebody is drawing your sword immediately, then the other person or the other creature gets that, okay, you're a threat, this is a threat response, you know, and instead of, you know, being someone who's not a threat, and then see how they react, because one makes the other, you know, every action is there's a reaction.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you have to go into a situation believing that you have the capability to leave it without fighting. You can't go in assuming the worst of these different creatures in the Underland. You have to go in with like the confidence of like, they don't want to fight, we don't want to fight. We can get through this without anyone getting killed. I love that scene in the next book. I can't wait to get to it when they encounter the scorpions, because that's also a very like quintessential scene where the message of the series is really driven home.
Yeah, and I love that message. It's wonderful. Like I've always I've always told my daughter, and it's kind of reminds me of like the Hunger Games, where what's the little girl?
Rue.
Yeah. About how her best defense or whatever is to run and hide and, you know, go up in trees and all of that. And that is a huge, like, strategy. You know what I mean? Rather than fighting. And I have a tiny little daughter, and I always try to, like, prepare her for life at public school. And I say, you know, you see someone fighting, you run and hide, you know, because that's her skill. Yeah. And not everybody has those capabilities that they're going to fight. Other people are more suited for other things. Yeah. And you got to think about what your strengths are.
Exactly. I'm the same way. If I ever saw a fight happening in the school hallways, I'd be like, I'm not part of that. Exactly. I'm going to go to class.
I'm out. Get out of there.
Just like take the other hallway around. Oh, yeah, I had forgotten about Rue. It's been a while since I read The Hunger Games. I need to reread them, especially since I end up talking about them a lot on this podcast. I had totally forgot that Rue, her whole thing is, like, to hide.
Yes.
Yeah, Peeta also. Like, his skill is to, like, become invisible with his, like,
bakery
skills. Yeah, exactly. His painting skills. Yeah, that's so interesting. I had forgotten about both of those things.
Yeah, and it's totally working on your strengths.
Exactly.
And what is best for you. And everybody has their own unique strengths, and the hammer from your toolbox is not always the right tool. Yeah.
And then this Hamnet is like teaching Luxa here, like, you can develop the skills to not have to fight. If you're really good at fighting, which Luxa is, like, that doesn't need to be your first thing, even if that's, like, if fighting is what you're good at, then you're going to go into everything fighting. Yes. And if Regalian society is constantly teaching you how to fight and that's your only option, then that's all you're going to do. But if Regalian society put effort into developing other skills in their people, then they wouldn't have to do that.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. The Starshade is half harvested, and Gregor is feeling hopeful about getting the cure back to Regalia and saving his mom. He thinks about how his mom might still want to move to the family farm in Virginia, and about how he'd miss New York City and his friends. But it'd be worth it if his family didn't have to spend every minute afraid. I really like this because, once again, Gregor is, like, being self-sacrificing for his family. He's saying, like, yeah, my mom might want to uproot the whole family and go to Virginia, and that would be really sad for me because I'd have to leave my friends in New York City, which I love. But if my family didn't have to be afraid, then I would do it. And he's just like, we're not even going to cross that bridge yet. Like, he's just thinking ahead of, like, okay, mom's going to get better. We're going to go back home, and she might still want to go to Virginia, and I'm just going to have to deal with that because that's what's going to make my family safe. And he's such a, like, eldest son.
Yes. It's a very rare quality for a young boy to be thinking about his family over himself. But, like, also he's got, like, a wider perspective now of what it is to, like, live in fear, and how all the people and creatures are living in fear down there, you know, and how awful it is. And
I think that he's thinking, like, if we can get away from that, then I'm going to take that chance, even if it's sad that I have to leave my friends. And yeah, I think at this point he's also kind of, like, realizing how entangled in the Underland he is, and he's not so sure that he can leave the Underland behind either.
Right. But it also made me wonder too, like, how many friends does he have when he's been gone down to Regalia for months or years?
Right.
And, before it was just like he never hung out with friends. He would just go to Mrs. Scormacy's and do some work and help his family. And I don't want to be negative. I'm sure he has plenty of friends.
I think it says that he only has the two, though. Ooh. He has Larry and Angelina. I think that's who he hangs out with at school. Yeah. But yeah, I always wonder, like, what do Larry and Angelina think is happening with Gregor? Yes. Like, his family keeps telling everyone that, like, him and Boots get the flu, and that's why they're gone all the time. So, like, are Larry and Angelina just like, oh yeah, Gregor gets sick a lot, like? Right.
I'd be doing a home visit if I were that teacher. What's going on?
Oh my gosh, you're right. Who's looking into this family?
Exactly.
Oh man. Suddenly, the bats and rats' heads snap up. They face the far end of the field, and Rip Red asks angrily, how did they even get in here? Nike says they must have eaten their way in, and Gregor asks who they're talking about. Before Nike can answer, the chapter ends with hundreds of red ants pouring into the field, destroying everything in their path.
And that's so upsetting and alarming, and it made me think, like, why? What do you have against all the Warmbloods of the world? You really want to kill them all? Or did somebody else put you up to this? Or what's happening?
Ooh, that's a good thought.
Yeah, like...
I'd always just thought that, like, the ants, or they call them the cutters,
right,
they just hate the Warmbloods, and they just are, like, kind of, like, mindless creatures. Right. But we don't get a whole lot about the ant's perspective. Like, we never talk to an ant.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean, obviously, it's a hive mind, and they're all working together, but, like, I don't know. And then it goes back to, like, teaching everyone to fear and to hate other creatures.
Yeah.
You know, and the same can happen for a hive mind of insects.
It's true, yeah. I wonder how... I guess I'm assuming that the ants have a similar, like, cognitive ability that the cockroaches have. Mm-hmm. But we never talk to an ant, so we don't really know how much we are able to communicate with them and stuff. Mm-hmm. So that's interesting to think about.
Yeah, I wonder if Hazard could communicate with them.
Yeah, he would try.
He would try.
He would try his best.
See, and that's another skill that's developed that's highly beneficial, because if he can communicate with other groups of folks, then you can start to, you know, have new ideas about working together.
Yeah, that's everything.
Mm-hmm. And it just reminded me of the part where, like, Gregor and Luxa were like, well, we've got the thumbs, so we'll use the duct tape, and you guys all can, you know, harvest, and, you know, let's work together.
Exactly. That reminds me of, in the first book, they cross a bridge in the rats' land, and Gregor thinks about how the humans, bats, and rats would have all had to work together to build it, because it's in the rats' land, but the humans would have had to, like, cut the stone, and then the bats would have had to, like, fly to build the bridge. Yeah, that makes me think of, like, how there were times in the past when all these species were peaceful with each other and, like, they got things done together.
Yeah. What happened?
Yeah.
Why can't we all just get along?
That is the message of these books. Yep. Yeah, this was a fun chapter.
It was.
A lot going on with Hamnet and Luxa. Mm-hmm. I love that Luxa and Hamnet finally, like, get to talk to each other.
Yeah.
Because I love the idea of, like, Hamnet knowing Luxa as a baby and then having to leave and then meeting her again and kind of being disappointed by how Luxa is, like, how she acts and the way that she thinks about the world. And then he kind of realizes, like, oh, I could teach her things.
Yeah, it is. In, like, typical teenage fashion, she thinks that maybe she knows it all.
Yeah.
When really she does not. And, you know, seeing something from a way different outside perspective probably isn't her strong suit at her young age.
Yeah.
But, like, I am glad that they got to meet and talk. And, you know, maybe she didn't completely understand his thoughts and ideas, but she started to, and that was super valuable.
Exactly. She's like on her way.
Yeah.
It's like what Hamnet imparts to her here is gonna, like, stick with her, and it's gonna come back up in the next 2 books. I love how Hamnet's advice just, like, keeps coming back to Gregor throughout the books as well.
Yeah, and it's great for Gregor as well, because Gregor had a lot of these same feelings as Hamnet did, but yet he doesn't have any kind of perspective as far as, you know, the way everybody else lived.
Yeah. Like, Gregor is coming into the Underland and being like, why do the rats and humans hate each other so much? And everyone around him is like, we just do, and it's the way it is, and you just need to get with it, and you're the warrior, and blah, blah, blah. And Gregor is like, but it doesn't have to be this way, right?
Yeah.
And everyone is kind of like, no, it does have to be this way. Yeah. And then Hamnet comes in and is like, no, I'm with you.
Yes.
Like, he kind of confirms Gregor's thoughts of there are different ways to deal with this conflict.
Exactly. That's what I was trying to say when I forgot my thought in the middle of the thought. But
I got you.
Thank you. But yeah, I love that, because now Gregor can have somebody, like, backing him up, like, okay, well, no, we don't have to think about it this way. Yeah. So I'm glad he got to also spend time with him too.
Exactly. Hamnet's a very important character.
Totally.
Yeah. Even
more now that I know that he's boyfriends with Meredith.
Exactly. This is what I'm saying. Yeah, just when he says earlier, like, Hamnet says Meredith is one of the only people that I don't mind being in debt to. Like, that just has so much behind it to me.
Because, yeah, I was like, why? What? You know?
It's there. It's there. I can feel it in my bones.
Maybe a prequel will come out of that story.
Oh my god, I would give it anything. Did you see the Songbirds and Snakes movie?
I feel like I did, but I cannot remember.
It's, yeah, because it's like the prequel with President Snow as like a younger guy. So like Suzanne Collins wrote that book and then worked on the movie.
Yes.
And Nate and I were discussing like if there was going to be a Gregor the Overlander prequel, like who would it be about?
Yeah.
And we thought it might be cool to do like a Solovette prequel.
Ooh, that would.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, because like we got, you know, evil President Snow as a younger guy, so let's get evil Solovette as like a younger woman.
Yes.
Like what turned her into this?
Yes. How did that all happen?
But then we could have some Hamnet and Meredith
totally
mixed in there.
You can even have like a mini prequel, like a novella.
I'll write it. If Suzanne Collins does it, I'm going to.
I can't wait to read it.
Well, thank you so much for joining me for this episode, Carrie.
No problem. So much fun.
Yeah, it's so great to talk about this chapter with you. Next week's episode will cover chapters 23 and 24. Find us on Tumblr, Instagram, and YouTube at Return to Regalia, all one word. Thank you for listening, and until next time, fly you high.
Fly you high.